So I recently saw the new Odyssey movie in IMAX 70 millimeter at the King of Prussia Regal. So this is gonna be my literally my first movie review on this channel. Um, and I'm gonna try to do it without too many cuts. So bear with me. But yeah, I got some notes here that I'm just gonna go through. So overall, like high level, I would definitely recommend this movie. I know there was like a lot of negative comments online. I feel like a lot of those comments were from people who had seen the trailers and not actually seen the movie yet. And I'll be honest, like the trailers even had me a little bit worried too. But I think this is one of the cases where the movie was a lot better than the trailers made you think. Like the trailers kind of undersold it. Uh, and yeah, all in all, I think it was just like a great, entertaining summer blockbuster movie, kind of just a classic Nolan movie. And like I said, I saw it in 70 millimeter IMAX. I think this is one of those movies where that definitely made a big difference. So if you are going to see it, I would say, see it on the biggest screen you can. And not just that, but on like highest quality projection. So for example, even within IMAX, obviously 70 millimeter film is the best. But even if you have the choice between regular IMAX versus IMAX with laser, then you should go with laser. And obviously, you want the biggest IMAX screen you can go to as well. So there's all those things to consider. So yeah, that's high level. I guess like let me get into like some of the details now. So the first thing I had written down here was like pacing, story, and action. Overall, I thought it was pretty well paced, probably better paced than a lot of Nolan's other movies. I kind of share my thoughts with a lot with what a lot of people were saying. Where like in the beginning, it took a little bit longer to like start up. And maybe it was slightly less action, a little bit more boring, more dialogue and stuff. And then my favorite part was actually the middle section, where like it's all the journeys and the creatures and the fighting and all that kind of stuff. Um, and then I know a lot of people really like the third act as well, the ending. I like that too, but at least first time around, I felt like it got a little bit more like muddled up, but the payoff was still like really satisfying. But like I said, my absolute favorite was just in the middle part where the Odysseus and his men are going on their adventures. Um, yeah, in terms of the action, like overall, the action was really good and really like tense and exciting, and you got super hyped up. The music was really um, really good to listen to. This is another Ludwig Göransson soundtrack. So what I really liked in the music is how it just keeps building. During the Trojan horse scene, there's this like beat in the background, like this bass beat that just keeps building and building and building. And it's one of those like auditory illusions where it seems to go like it's going higher and higher, and yet that's not possible because it's like going like that for minutes on end. So I think Goranson probably used some shepherd scales or something. If you're not familiar with those, you should definitely look them up online. It's a interesting technique. But yeah, so the music was really good for the action scenes. As for like the fighting scenes themselves, they were well choreographed, and I like the fact that everything was in camera, no like digi doubles. It was all real people. But like the actual fight scenes, I'd say were a little bit kind of average, kind of mediocre, and that's because it was one of those movies where like the sword hits didn't really feel super impactful. Like I feel like it was a lot of fast cuts. So, during the fight scenes, you would get like a split second of a guy hitting another guy, and then it would cut to some other guys fighting, and it would just keep cutting like that. So I know like most new movies are like that, but it's not my favorite type of fight scene. But like to be fair, like I felt that way even about like Lord of the Rings and just most movies with battle scenes. One movie that I thought that did it better was Braveheart. Here, like, it almost felt like PG-13, right? It was mostly just kind of swords hitting other swords type of stuff. And there wasn't a lot of like real impactful violence that made you feel like you were in the scene. Yeah, so that's what I thought about the action. Well, so those were like the fight scenes. The action that I did really like was like the kind of fantastical stuff and the creatures. So obviously there's the Cyclops scene, which might be like, I mean, it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I just think it's so well done and the effects are super good. I mean, this is one of those movies where like there's probably either no scene or just like a couple frames, right, where you think you're looking at CG. Like all of it just looks so realistic and believable, like it was filmed in camera. I really like the Cyclops scene. Uh, I liked how it was shot, like, you know, kind of tenebristically, like almost like a painting. So I know Nolan referenced that painting, Saturn Devouring His Children by Goya. Same as Del Toro. I know Del Toro referenced that painting as well for Pan's Labyrinth. But you could definitely tell, like, just the way the shadows and stuff were in that cave, it felt like an old symbolist painting or something. One thing I will say about the fantastical scenes, though, is like I feel like they were cut a little bit short. So one thing about this movie is the action scenes feel very episodic. So it's like, you know, there's this like really good build up, and then there's like a cool fight scene or a cool monster or something. But it's kind of like if you blink, you'll miss it. I mean, like it's not that bad, but it feels like it just goes by real quick. And maybe that's partly because these are like to me like the most interesting scenes in the movie. But I feel like he never really shows the monsters. He never really lingers on them with the camera, and maybe that's partly to like, kind of like leave you wanting more, or maybe even so you come back to see it a second time. But yeah, just, you know, be ready for that. Like this is not one of those movies where you're just like you get to see the full monster for like minutes on end. It's kind of you see glimpses of it. But I guess in a way that maybe makes it even a little bit more scary. Um, it was the same with like the giants in the armor. I think they're the Lygostronians or something. I probably said that wrong, but it was really cool. But like again, the scene where they're kind of like outmatched by these giant guys and they're like throwing people around and stuff. For me, it was over pretty quickly. Um, Actually, like same with the, and hopefully I'm not spoiling this because hopefully, you know, you've seen this in the trailer, but like with the whirlpool scene, it was, you know, photorealistic. I assume they like rendered it or simulated it, but it looked like it was an actual whirlpool. But it just felt a little bit like smaller scale than maybe I was expecting. So I think I could say that about all the action scenes in this movie, where what I really liked is how grounded and like photorealistic they seemed. No green screen or anything like that, but they seemed a little bit smaller scale than maybe I was expecting, and they were over a little bit faster. So a little bit similar to how in the nuke scene in Oppenheimer, like yeah, it looked realistic because it was real in-camera effects you were seeing, but it was a little underwhelming and over kind of quickly. So I would say like he didn't go to that level here. Like it was still satisfying, but it just wasn't as large in scale as like some other movies that rely more heavily on CG. I have written in my notes here that it was a little bit like a tasting menu where these fantastical episodes were like super intense and the production quality was super high, but they were over really quickly. It felt more like a small taste. Another note I have written down is like, so obviously Christopher Nolan takes the nonlinear route here for the narrative, and it's not as confusing as like Tenet or Inception or whatever. It's not even as nonlinear as Interstellar, I would say, but still, it's not a straightforward journey like just going through episode by episode, right? It's more like you get to see some Odysseus and his men, and then it cuts to Telemachus back at home, and it goes back and forth, uh, which is fine. Like I found it, you know, very easy to follow. But one thing I felt about the cutting back and forth is that maybe it actually made the voyage part with Odysseus and his men seem a little bit shorter. So what I mean by that is like I almost felt like the middle section with Odysseus's journeys went by too fast. Odysseus and his men were out there for like many years, right? And yet by the end of the film, it almost feels like I'm wanting more of those journeys, and like that middle section just went by so fast. So I think one reason for that is because all of that cutting back and forth made you perceive that time of the journey kind of like not as like long of a stretch of time, right? Like imagine it was just a linear thing where the middle section was just fully focused on Odysseus and his men in their either in their ship or on the different islands and stuff. I feel like it would have made that middle section feel longer, which is what you want, right? Because that like in reality that's the longest part of the movie chronologically. So, it's just a thought that maybe in some cases having more of a linear structure helps you to perceive the passing of time and how long it is, right? But I mean, like, to be fair, I think even in the actual Odyssey story by Homer, I think there is some cutting back and forth like that. I'm not 100% sure because it's been a while since I read it, but it's definitely not the level of cutting like you would see in like Tenet or something. It's very easy to follow. So the next thing I have written down here was, actually going back to the action scenes, one more thing I wanted to say is regarding the sense of scale. So obviously this was shot 100% in IMAX. So especially if you see it in 70 millimeter, you get that really tall aspect ratio. So you do get this sense of scale in that respect. And it does have its share of like really wide shots that are all like, fully real on location. So that gives you that epic scale as well. But one thing I do feel is that Nolan is not on the same level of portraying massive objects as like, say, Denis Villeneuve. So, before seeing this movie, they ran an IMAX trailer for Dune 3. And just in that like 5 minutes of trailer, there was this like huge floating thing that was like shooting at people. And just the way Denny like framed that shot, you could just like tell how massive it was, right? So I feel like in Nolan's Odyssey movie, you don't get as many of those shots where like you just feel like, the humans are just dwarfed by this hulking structure, whether that's like a mountain or the Cyclops or the giants. All the scenes feel a little bit more intimate to me. So, I mean, you get a sense of the Cyclops is bigger than the average human, but none of the shots are framed in such a way where you're just in awe by how big this guy is, right? And I feel like that's a little bit of a theme with this movie where Nolan, instead of, making things larger than life, he makes them kind of realistically sized, given that they're not actually realistic, they're fantastical. He tends on scaling things down just a little bit relative to like other fantasy movies. But yeah, so going to like the acting and dialogue, I know this is one thing where a lot of people were probably a little bit worried. I would say you don't have to be worried. Overall, the acting was very good. Like honestly, given how like, the actors didn't really feel like they were custom fit to the movie. It felt more like, seeing the trailers, I was worried that Nolan chose his like go-to actors. But when I actually watched the movie, I was pretty satisfied with the choice of actors. So I guess like starting out with one who really impressed me, Tom Holland. Coming into the movie, I was like, this guy, he doesn't seem like the type that you would, see in like a Greek epic, like fighting and being like kind of tough and all that. Like he seemed like he has a really young face, right? Even though he's like already 30. But seeing him as Telemachus, I kind of changed my mind. Like, I feel like he was actually pretty good for the role. Like, yeah, he has a young face, but that's kind of part of the point with Telemachus. Like, he's coming of age, right? By the end of the movie, you definitely do feel like he has a little bit of an arc and he's like more mature and he's ready to like take over his father's kingdom, right? And then the actual like emotional part of the acting, I was actually super impressed with Tom Holland as Telemachus. Like, it's not overacting. It's the type of scenes where when he like first realizes that he's seeing his father, you could tell that he's like holding back, right? He's not like going all out and crying, but he's kind of holding back tears. And that kind of subtle acting is what I really like. So I was impressed with Tom Holland. Matt Damon was really good. I feel like people were kind of expecting that one, but I felt like he was really good. The theme here is like, it's not overacting. So I feel like the performances are pretty subtle, which I actually like. One performance that was a little bit less subtle, And not my favorite in the movie was Anne Hathaway. So just to be clear, I think most of her scenes were actually pretty good. But like the scenes where she was kind of being a little bit more on the like super emotional side and crying and breaking down, I felt like maybe she could have just dialed it back just slightly. But overall, it was fine. Obviously, like Robert Pattinson was good as the villain here, Antinous. And then like all the supporting actors, I think were pretty good too. I know like a lot of people were worried about the actors who played Helen and Elliot Page's character and all that, Travis Scott. But honestly, I didn't like. They seemed fine to me. Like they weren't so glaring that like they took you out of the experience. I feel like this is not supposed to be like a super historically accurate movie. It's more of like a myth, right? And I know like Nolan could have gone the historically accurate route, but I feel like what he chose to do is entertaining, and in the end, at the end of the day, it still makes a good film. Although, like, I guess it is unfortunate that he didn't cast many local Greek actors. I mean, maybe as extras, I couldn't tell. But it's the route that he chose to go, and I think at the end of the day, it's still a good movie. And it's not like the casting choices ruin it. Uh, and then like related to that, as for the dialogue, that was another thing. I was worried that it was going to take me out of the movie. But to be honest, for me, like I got used to it like really quickly, and I kind of see where Nolan was coming from. So just to clarify, I'm talking about the fact that the dialogue was not like the dialogue was kind of modern. There's like words like dad or daddy used and stuff like that, and the accents are not British sounding accents. It's just like American accents, right? Um, Now, I actually think I see where he was coming from, because at the end of the day, like even if everyone spoke in like this more proper kind of British accent, that's not Greek either, right? Uh, if you really want it to be realistic, you would need to like not only have everyone talking Greek, but like figure out the dialect that people were using back thousands of years ago. So obviously, that's not feasible for like just a movie that's supposed to be somewhat entertaining, right? So for me, like I get the choice, and it's not like people were using like words that were like super modern, right? The trailers kind of picked out the daddy and the let's go and all that stuff, but overall, it's not like you get like Travis Scott like saying, "Oh, like we killed mad soldiers," and right? Like, uh, I feel like people kind of exaggerated it. So yeah, it didn't really take me out of the story at all. Like after a couple minutes, you kind of just settle into it, and it becomes invisible. So on to the visuals. Obviously, these were like kind of a standout. You probably saw this coming. Not many complaints there. Like I said before, everything just feels super grounded and realistic and like in camera. Like I said, if there was one complaint about the visuals, it's that maybe Nolan could have added a little bit more CG and made the scale just feel a lot bigger. Um, but I kind of respect him for erring on the side of less CG, right? Because I would much rather have every single scene be look like photorealistic than have one scene where you're like, oh, that's CG, and it kind of pulls you out of the action. So I definitely see where Nolan is coming from. One thing that I did not like about the visuals, and to be fair, this is more like just a modern filmmaking thing, like you see this in the Doom movies as well, is that the colors felt a little bit muted and desaturated. I think this is a modern trend, right? Where it's like everything has to look like super serious and stylized, right? So, I feel like Nolan used a lot of this orange and teal color grading, which you see in like other movies, like Denis Villeneuve's movies as well. And yeah, it looks really cool. But after like a couple minutes of this, I just want to see like realistic colors, as opposed to like colors that are kind of dialed back and like muted and stuff. The Odyssey, I always thought of it as kind of like a more of a bright, colorful, kind of like sun-kissed landscape type of movie, right? There's some of that, in the on location scenes and everything, but it is more of a visually darker take than like older movies like Jason and the Argonauts and stuff like that. I kind of wish that Nolan had gone like a little bit more bright and colorful, but to be fair, like I kind of saw that coming, right? Like he did the same thing with the Dark Knight as well. That's kind of like his style. And then going on to the sound design. So that was another big positive for this movie. Um, Ludwig Göransson, I really like him as a composer. I think, in fact, he might be doing more interesting things than like Hans Zimmer was doing towards the end of his working with Nolan. Like I said before, these like repetitive bass tones that he uses during the action scenes that just keep growing and growing and growing, those are super effective, especially in a theater with a good subwoofer and all of that. And they just keep rising and rising. So it really really good at building tension. And then he makes, for the more quiet emotional scenes, he has like more analog instrumentation as well, like kind of flute sounding things, stuff like that. That works really well. The one like negative I have for this, and it's not really a negative, it's more of like, it's a stylistic choice that they did that I kind of would do differently, is there's no like recognizable theme in this movie. So, like when you think like a Greek epic, right? You kind of think like, oh, like epic themes, like something memorable. But to be honest, after I walked away from this movie, there's not one theme that I remember that I associate with the Odyssey. It's just not that kind of soundtrack. And again, like I realize this was an intentional choice, but part of me is still wishing that you had that memorable theme. And some final notes. Like I said, I think the trailers really did not do this movie justice. I think a lot of the people who are worried about it, if they do watch it, they'll be pleasantly surprised. Maybe it's not going to be like, the best movie ever for them, but for anyone who's like considers themselves a Nolan fan, I think you're going to watch this and it's going to be like up there for you. It's not going to be like necessarily your favorite Nolan movie, but it's definitely going to be up there. And just to be clear, again, regarding the negative comments, I was like just as worried as some of you guys. I'm the type, like, I did not like the new Star Wars movies. I felt like they just ruined the tone of the old movies. But I did not feel this way with this movie. I felt like there was some kind of interesting casting choices, but they did not like ruin the movie for me. Same with like the Travis Scott and having some kind of more modern music and modern dialogue. I felt like at the end of the day, it still felt old school enough and epic enough to just be like super satisfying, entertaining, something that I would definitely watch again in IMAX. In fact, I'm going to see it again on Monday in IMAX Laser. Oh, and by the way, that reminds me. So this poster here is from the screening at King of Prussia in IMAX 70 millimeter film. So that was like a really fun experience. I felt like everyone there liked it as well. I mean, obviously in 70 millimeter film, you're going to get more diehard Nolan fanboys, but there were just like a lot of normal people there too, who you could tell that they were just excited for this movie. It's not like they were influencers or critics. And I think, people were clapping at like multiple scenes in this movie, and basically everyone clapped at the end. So it's not one of those movies that's just for critics. I think the audience loved it as well. And it has a great audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, even higher than the critics last time I checked. So yeah, I would say if you're a movie fan, just give this a try, and I think you'll like it. If you have seen it, just let me know in the comments. But yeah, those are my closing thoughts. I think in like my post-theater reaction, I gave this 8.5. Just due to, some of the negatives I mentioned here. I felt like maybe with unlimited resources, Nolan could have made it even a little bit more epic. So I'm going to say instead of 8.5, I would knock it down to an 8 right now. I also felt like maybe he went a little bit too serious and dark, and that's his style. But, just personally, I would put this at an 8. And I would say like that's my final rating. But yeah, let me know what you think.